Good evening. Thank you for joining the Kenyon Review for our evening of poetry, conversation, and song with Saeed Jones, Shira Erlichman, and Ross Gay. We are thrilled to have you here. I'm Elizabeth Dark, Associate Director of the Kenyon Review, and I am being joined now on screen by our guests, as well as Kenyon Review Editor Nicole Therese Dutton, who will serve as our host for the evening. Before I pass it on to Nicole, I'd like to share a few things with you to help usher you through your time with us. If at any point you experience technical difficulties, please email kenyonreview@kenyon.edu, where a staff member is waiting to help you. If you would like to access closed captioning for this evening, you may do so by clicking the closed captioning button at the bottom of your screen. Our chat will remain open for greetings and positive comments from our audience. But if you have any questions you would like to ask us during the Q&A portion of the evening, please submit those using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to submit these at any time, as we will be collecting them throughout the evening. As the evening progresses, we will be placing in the chat links to our guests' websites, as well as to our bookshop store, should you wish to purchase any of their books. But please note, we will be giving away free books to 20 lucky audience members through a drawing at the end of the evening. If your name is drawn, we will be in touch with you to get your best mailing address, as well as your preferred book title, to avoid sending you a book you purchased tonight or perhaps already own. And finally, I want to offer a huge thanks to our Kenyon College co-sponsors who have made this evening possible. These co-sponsors include the Office of the President, the Black Student Union, the English Department, the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, the Richard L. Thomas Chair, the Office of Campus Events, and African Diaspora Studies. We are grateful for their support and their excitement to bring this event to our college community, as well as all the communities represented in our audience tonight. Thank you, and now I will pass it on to Nicole.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. And thank you all for being here. I'm really pleased to welcome you to a winter evening of words and songs. We were going to present a night of poetry even before Amanda Gorman reminded the country what Audre Lorde taught us, that poetry is not a luxury. And I want to read just a little bit of Audre Lorde for us. Poetry is not a luxury. It is a vital necessity of our existence. It forms the quality of the light within which we predicate our hopes and dreams towards survival and change, first made into language, then into idea, then into more tangible action. Poetry is the way we help give name to the nameless so it can be thought. The farthest horizons of our hopes and fears are cobbled by our poems, carved from the rock of experiences of our daily lives. Tonight, we have three poets with us, and I call them poets because I know them as poets, and even when they bring their wisdom and experience to the page in the form of prose, their writing is inclined nearly always towards song. These are accomplished writers and thinkers and artists of considerable acclaim, and though they have different backgrounds and interests and perspectives, they do have a few things in common. You do not make your way through a Ross Gay or Saeed Jones or Shira Erlichman text without being transformed. These three remind us of what we know to be true and right. And in a hard year, we could really use some reminding. I was taught in grad school that all writing is impossible. Ross, Shira, and Saeed remind us that we can, of course, do the impossible. And they remind us, whoever you are, wherever you're from, you're coming from a long line of people who make the everyday work of the impossible. By listening to them, we are emboldened, we are enlarged. By reading their work, by recognizing the love invested in it, we are returned to ourselves, albeit as a kinder, more compassionate, attentive, and even more joyful version of ourselves. So I'm pleased to welcome them and to welcome you to this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. Let me give you just a quick roadmap of what we are, of how the evening will unfold. First, Saeed will read, then Shira, then Ross, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions. So do feel free to ask all of your questions and keep in mind the things that spark you so that you can report back. to these readers. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce Saeed. Oh, and before I do, Saeed, I noticed on your website that you had a quick note about Paul Newman. Just a little quick note. I wanted to mention to you that, he's a Kenyan alum, right? Oh, yeah.
Uh,
Oh, yes.
that man just gets better the more I learn. I love it.
Saeed Jones lives in Columbus, Ohio. He's the author of the memoir, How We Fight for Our Lives, which won the 2019 Kirkus Prize for Nonfiction. He also wrote the poetry collection, Prelude to Bruise, which received the 2015 Penn Award for Poetry and the 2015 Stonewall Book Award. He is one of the most smart and entertaining folks you could ever hope to follow on Twitter. He speaks from a deep reservoir of quietness and listening and contemplation and close and wide reading. He's extraordinarily talented and honest, and I'm delighted to present him this evening. Please welcome Saeed Jones.
Hi, everyone. Nicole, thank you so much for that introduction. Thank you, Kenyan Review. When I received the invitation to read, of course, I was delighted, as someone who's a proud Ohioan now, but I love the Kenyan Review and I love Shira and Ross as people, but also as artists. So I very likely would be attending this reading, even if I wasn't actually reading tonight. So thank you. The poetry I've been working on lately is most often about, I think it's really the uncanny experience of being Black in this especially, or what feels like especially calamitous present, but also, having an awareness of history. And so both being, bewildered by what's going on, but also having some, deep understanding and context for why what's happening is happening. And so that's what I've been delving into. This first poem is That's Not Snow, It's Ash. You are no singer, but one night a song is stolen from you, never to be returned. The loss is like a dream about your lover burned alive. In the morning, he mumbles, making breakfast, favorite mug in hand. Fine. But you saw what you saw. You drink your coffee, pat his thigh, and watch the snow fall outside, pretending you don't smell smoke. He's fine, you think. We are fine. But how do you describe a song you can't sing? This is Black Ice. Overconfidence and an inch of ice could kill a man, or even a few, where I grew up in Texas. We didn't know what to do with a sudden white season, tricks of light and black ice. The cold came like a bruised backhand, bitter as the drivers it sent spinning. One February morning, the whip and clang of the stars and stripes outside our classroom window made me think of black backs bloody, broken open. I heard the screams and thought the screams heard me. When I finally pulled myself back into my body, slavery was written on the whiteboard. And my white classmates pretended not to look at me. While the teacher waited for an answer I knew then was mine to give. It's entirely possible I have a little Black History Month angst that I'm working through in some of these poems. If you just want to, do a little subtextual reading there. This is a poem I wrote a couple of years ago. I was on book tour for How We Fight for Our Lives. I was in Oxford, Mississippi. I did several events in Mississippi, and this event I was very excited to do. But Oxford is where the University of Mississippi is located, of course, and it is more colloquially known as Ole Miss, which is actually the name of the former slave master's wife, and Confederate celebration is just woven into the entire culture of that community. You can't get away from it, and it was a very intense experience. And so this is basically a nonfiction poem about my few days in Oxford, Mississippi. And the title comes from Shirley Jackson's The Lottery. It isn't fair, it isn't right. The color of a memory is the difference between haunted and hunted. In Mississippi, red, white, and blue don't mean, remember, this is America. They mean, history is a gun, and every bullet in its chamber wants you to forget. They mean, we tried our best not to be America and failed, and now we keep forgetting to forget. And anyway, who did you vote for? No need to ask us. You already know. They mean the white man in the White House tweeted this morning that he's being lynched. Outside my hotel, no, I'm not from around here. On the street corner, there is a plaque that tells me where I can find the body of the town's first white settler. But it's almost sundown, and I've been told that darkness in Mississippi is not a metaphor, so I chase the shadows back into the hotel. At the bar, I beg the bartender to make me a stronger drink. He tries, and he fails. I'm scared and Black and mostly sober at the hotel bar and reading an essay about lynching when some Ole Miss frat boys explode into the room, cheering in a dead language. And my heart doesn't even wait for me to get the check. My heart is already gone. My heart is cowering in the hallway in front of my hotel room because I have the key and I just now got the check, and I keep forgetting to forget that the America I was born in will not be the America in which I die. This is The Proxy Wars, which was both inspired by Colson Whitehead's most recent novel, the Nickel Boys, but also a news article about a situation here in Columbus, Ohio. The Proxy Wars. Somewhere in suburbia, a man-made creek runs black with junk we choked on, then spat, tin can curses and cracked bones from broken homes we broke down, paved over, and built our shiny, short-lived lives on. All the foxes and coyotes have ghosted our gated, security-guarded imitations of strife. Our dreams gentrify your nightmares. And rumor has it, Serenity Estates used to be a Black cemetery. Boo, fucking who? We pulled ourselves up by your bootstraps, fucked missionary under a nuclear moon to get here, and what we've got starts to rot as soon as we get it. So I say, good riddance. Name of the game. America is American for wreck and repeat. This song isn't comfort, it's just to help me sleep. At least this misery is mine. I sing in my loned and lonely dark. And in the poplar tree outside my window, a mockingbird sings my song back to me. So I get out of bed, pick up my perfect pink pistol, and shoot it dead. I don't know if you know, but to celebrate breast cancer awareness, you can absolutely buy a pink gun. This is Alive at the End of the World. The end of the world was mistaken for just another midday massacre in America. Brain matter and broken glass, blurred boot prints in pools of blood. We dialed the newly dead, but they wouldn't answer. We texted, begging them to call us back, but the newly dead don't know how to read. In America, a gathering of people is called target practice or funeral, depending on who lives long enough to define the terms. But for now, we are alive at the end of the world. Shell-shocked by headlines and alarm clocks, burning through what little love we have left. Time, the white boys with guns will become wounds we won't quite remember enduring. How did you get that scar on your shoulder? Oh, a boy I barely knew was sad once. Obviously, grief is very much a part of my experience, as it is for many of you, I'm sure. But also, you know, I think aside from the personal, I think grief is also a relationship to history. I think history is a kind of grief. This is a stranger. I wonder if my dead mother still thinks of me. I know I don't know her new name. I don't know her, not now. I don't know if her is the word burning in a stranger's mind when he sees my dead mother walking down the street in her bright black dress. I wonder if he inhales the cigarette smoke that will eventually kill him and thinks, I wish I knew a woman who was both the light and every shadow the light pierces. I wonder if a passing glance at my dead mother is enough to make a poet out of anyone. I wonder if I'm the song she hums and she waits for the light to change, or if I'm just the traffic signal holding her up. And I'll read just a couple more poems. I'm so excited to hear from Shira and Ross and to talk with them. This is a spell to banish grief. Only when you wake to a fistful of pulled hair on the floor beside your bed and, from a glance, can guess its weight. When you study dried tear streaks on your cheeks like a farmer, figuring out where the season went wrong. When a friend calls out your name 3 or 4 times before you know your name is yours. When your name fits like clothes you've suddenly outgrown. When there is too much of you, too few of you, too you of you, and the mirrors wish all of you would just look away. When the clocks can't feel their hands and the calendars begin to doubt themselves. When you begin to agree with the glares from mirrors, but your reflection follows you around the house anyway. When you catch yourself drunk on memory, candles lit, eyes closed, your head tilted in the direction of cemetery grass, yellow and balding above what's left of the body that birthed you. And you try to remember the sound of laughter in her throat and fail. Only then, orphan, will I take all my selves and leave. Yeah. Hi, Caesar. Yeah. All right. Okay. He was like, wrap it up, girl. Okay. So this last poem is my version of a happy poem. It celebrates the life of Susanna Mushat Jones. She was born, she was a Black woman born in 1899. She died in 2016. And at the time, she was the oldest woman in America. And I just think that's an incredible story. This is Anthem for Susanna Mushat Jones. The end of the world was a song most of us found too painful to sing. The chorus cut through us every time we tried, but just a few breaths before she died. The oldest woman in America decided her body could carry the highest note one last time for the rest of us. Something about the nature of Black lungs breathing through 116 years and 311 days. Something about what being born in Alabama in 1899 and making it to 2016 in Brooklyn does to the throat. It was a spring evening, and the stars refused to sit still, blinking as they burned above her in the dark. Only dead light can understand what she did for us that night. Know that the sky has been grieving her ever since. Know that the fire falling on us now began as grateful tears. Thank you so much.
That was lovely, and difficult, and I feel lifted for having heard it. So thank you for that. I'd like to introduce Shira, and I'm going to read from Shira's bio first, and then add a little bit more. Her bio is so perfect. Shira, in Hebrew, Shira means song and poem. Born in Israel, now living in Brooklyn, Shira Erlichman is an author, visual artist, and a musician. Her poems explore recovery of language, of home, of mind. Being diagnosed with bipolar disorder a decade ago fundamentally changed her life and, wildly enough, deepened her love of being here. Her poetry book, Odes to Lithium, which is gorgeous, centers around her experiences with mental illness. Her picture book, Behold, a friendship book, uses compound words to illuminate what is possible when we come together. Shira is the founder of Freer Form, a portable creativity school. Shira may mean song and poem, but I would also add prayer. So many of these poems speak to an abiding faith in our ability to see and hold each other. She has all kinds of awards and honors that acknowledge her achievements as a writer, all of which are impressive, but what matters perhaps most, and what you will soon see, is that she brings the thunder and she brings the light. Please welcome Shira Erlichman.
You know, I think Nicole proves that it is really just people doing all this. And it's an extraordinary pleasure to be in a room right now of 327 people who decided to be here. And it would not be possible if it wasn't for people like Nicole, who take such delicate care in welcoming, just period, welcoming. So I just want to say thanks to Kenyon Review. You know, there's so much care that went into putting this together, and it is so deeply felt. I want to say thanks to everybody who's sponsoring it and coming together tonight to make sure the tech is working, just to be present and available, helpful. And then to Saeed and to Ross, just, you know, yes, just yes. And it's, you know, I know Saeed more than I know Ross, but this is actually a wedding for me and Ross, so welcome to that. But both of their books have really like just kept me such deep company as I've traveled across the country. I've had both of their books on me back when travel was a thing we could do. And so I just feel it's a tremendous joy to be in this room with them and to hear them. I also just see my eyes are glazing over some of the chat situations, and I see so many students from ISL in Surreal Life, and I see so many friends. And you know, this digital space, which you can hear Brooklyn is inside of, this digital space is a weird one, but at the bottom of it, we are literally all together in some kind of way tonight. And I just couldn't feel it more looking at this chat right now. What else did I want to say? I think that's it. Some will come up. So thank you. I'm excited. I'm going to read some poems, maybe play some songs. And let's start. This poem is called Somewhere Real. Get in, George Eliot. I packed PB&Js. I'm bringing that rainbow parachute we held hands under as 8-year-olds. Get in, right beside Autumn, beside every manic pixie dream girl screenplay written by a man, beside Bad Weather, beside Allegra's pomegranate split into 5 uneven offerings, beside Allegra herself. She's a mother now as I write this. Get in television and all the extinct hardware of the 90s. Montel, Jerry, Ricky, get in. I'm driving. Get in, exes. Tell me about life without me. Pick the music. Thread a threat through my dumb brown hair. Something like, you were always so, and then let the rain finish your sentence. Get in, rain, but don't hog the air. I'm running away. I'm tired of not being a monk. Get in. You're so vain and 5 o'clock shadows and how hard it is to not talk to my brother. We went a whole year and a half. Get in, year and a half. Get in, therapist, with the good haircut and bad advice. You too, Michael Jackson. I'm so sorry you had to be Michael Jackson. The kind of snow that only fell when I was young, get in. Or maybe it's just how I saw it, get in. I'm trying desperately not to sound cute, which is, of course, adorable. But please, 11 siblings killed in the camps, get in, next to my grandfather. Pill-headedness, get in. Pema Chodron's forehead and everything behind it, get in. I'm not gonna say it again. Buckle up, put a daffodil behind my ear, touch my shoulder from the back seat, write my will for me. Tell Mary Ann Evans I can hear her humming, it's fine, except it's driving me nuts. I'm aware that I'm crying, get in. Sit next to Kaveh, the baffling intelligence of starling and uteri, front seat. I'm only 5 feet tall, too many strangers pick me up as a gag. My recurring dream is that I choose this life again. Keep your hands inside the vehicle, the mandolin I inherited because of genocide. Keep me awake all night. Morgan, I just want to watch your hands protect a flame. Everybody, I'm sorry. I'm doing my best not to lean so hard on metaphor I avoid where I am. This road invented itself. Even though I get the facial expressions right, I'm a poor listener, get in. Greasy-haired, buck-toothed, gets distracted easily, deodorant stain, secret crush on Catherine, come on in. Throw your book bag out the window and tell me your favorite color. Turquoise, get in. The locker they shoved Gabby into, and I didn't do it, but I didn't stop them, get in. The line between where you almost went and where you're going, they call that a fork. Funny. Every time I let the moon roof slide open, but there was no moon, get in, hurry slowly, slow up, slur your worlds, say your sorrow, admit you loved the uglier twin while arm in arm with the one older by a second. Oh, cherishing, get in, it's not too late, get in, the diner never closes, get in, put your feet on the dash, I'm stopping at I can't believe they call it this. 2 commands, rest, stop. The game is we rush into the gas station. You buy me a souvenir I most certainly don't need, and I you. I found this keychain. It blinks your name. They never have mine. Get in. Get in, world, death, time. I swear, I'll turn this car around if you don't hotbox us vapid. The day the stars come down and start walking around like they own the place, God said, I'm quitting. Get in. The game is I spy. The game is who can be quiet the longest. The game is hold your breath, there's a cemetery. Order me fries, order me lungs, order me around, order my manuscript. Here's a handful of pennies, of ketchup packets, of sky. I know you're exhausted. Get in, I'm driving you home. Roll down your window, the forecast is alive. The dog's kicking in his sleep, which means a brain the size of a lemon can squeeze a whole dream. Poor poet, get in. You never could say goodbye with grace. Lucille, get in. Dead family, get in. I want to show you something. I had no map when I started, and now here I am, somewhere real, called loving you. Get in. All right. So I'm gonna play a song. And how lovely of Kenyon to ask me to do so. and I don't know, I've never done this for Zoomites before, which is our religion. So we'll see how this goes. And yeah, hopefully you can hear me. This is a song that I wrote. I love when, folk singers do that. They like play while they talk. So I'm gonna do that. This is a song that I wrote when I hadn't written for maybe like 2 years. And then this kind of came out as it is. It's called Real If Not Real Easy, which has become a mantra of sorts. You make me want to get in the clouds, a cloud, and the red is red. I put my hands on everything, and it is real. You make me want myself again, a pill on my tongue, and the red is red. I put my heart on everything, and it is real, it is real. If I'm not real easy, it is real. If I'm not real easy, you make me want to find the thread, the needle lost, and bread is bread. I put my eyes on everywhere, and it is real. You make me want to leave a song on God's front porch, and red is red. I put my arms around everyone, and it is real, it is real. If I'm not real easy, it is real. If I'm not real easy, you make me wanna reel. If I'm not real easy, to put the water on a reel. If I'm not real easy, you bring home daffodils real. If I'm not real easy, you knew it all along real. If I'm not real easy, you knew it all along. And bread is 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 bread is. I feel a little like Mr. Rogers. Like the kids are out there. I just gotta share my message. All right, let's see where we're at. Yeah, we're doing it. I'm gonna read a poem. I'm gonna drink some water. I am gonna change my shoes. You got it, Kamal. I got my slippers right there, so maybe that'll be like my next move. All right, this is a poem called First Nude. The title, sometimes poem titles, you're like, wow, that really means something else. But with this one, it was just truly my first nude that I ever took. I am somewhat of a prude and somewhat wholesome. And so it was a real evening for me to attempt a nude when all of my friends were like, our phone is entirely nudes. So why aren't you doing this? So this is a sonnet, and I have a series of nudes. Thank you, everybody. And this is the first in the series. It's called First Nude. The camera shutter licks a self I build out of breast spill and squashed butternut sun. It's almost night. A nipple definites the sheets. How to put this? I'm alive. So I gift my coming coffin coffee beans and sex. Not with anyone, just the lens. Purr, nether engine, private as spit. No need to pray. The Buddha's breath touches even this. Warm undervoice twixt the thighs. You could say beehive misbehaving, or just pussy will do. Wet lens, legs spread. Lord, there's nothing you would say to steal me from me. Moon moves across collarbone. Find me in a black room, same hour that loved Jesus. That's the hidden archive from Mr. Rogers, a very delicate archive. Wow, we're really doing this. I have time. Yeah, I can do this. Okay, I got 2 more for you. So here's a poem I've never read aloud to people before because I was thinking about risk. My partner and I were talking about what it means to share something new when you are so used to kind of sharing what you got and what's in your arsenal. So this is a new poem, never shared. Thank you for being the space for it. It's called Oumuamua, which is a Hawaiian word that means messenger from the distant past. And it is based on Oumuamua, which maybe you guys know, maybe you like the science, but it's a creature object that moved into our stratosphere from who knows where, another universe. So this is for Oumuamua and about Oumuamua. You nearly kissed us. I was eating a grilled cheese flecked in basil when I felt the hair on my neck rise. I didn't know it was you, but in some sense it's always you. Messenger from the distant past, reaching out with metallic soil fingers to touch us, remind us, no matter how many barbecues we throw, we're going to die. In the Hubble photographs, you race like a New Yorker, a non-committal dot blurring between other non-committal dots. In one artist's rendering, you're a spooky tooth, a traveling hallway. It's said you're the first known interstellar mass to pass into our solar system, celestial driftwood. I felt you, pick our lock and enter. And though you disappear, you are here, lodged in my throat, a red-black bone flung from who knows where, a glistenberry turning in the dark pocket of God. Though let's not kid ourselves, you are God. You spy on our restless marble. The back of my neck knows there's heaven, and then there's heaven. An hourglass, minus the hours, you tumble dry through a web of zeros. Remind us, remind us. I was sinking my teeth into a cheesy basil peppered sandwich, the likes of which you'll never know, while a million long lost brother Oumuamuas moved in stealth, can opening the atmosphere. Wherever you come from is beyond the monosyllabic dark. When I close my eyes and imagine your home, I see a mud-slick calf wailing motherless. Like all good questions, its belly is black. Remind me, my indecipherable nomad, my return to no sender, my alien friend. Like you, I came from somewhere. I'm spinning off course, perfectly on course. In this kitchen, dented by shadow, spatula at hand, flipping a second grilled cheese for the woman in my living room. How will I tell her? As we sloppily dance our teeth across melted butter, her hands understanding my hair, my hands a bowl at her face, curled in each other, we obsess until sunrise. We grow rich, spending the currency of our breath. Oumuamua, you're out of sight line now. No astronomer knows your ecstatic thievery of heaven, but I do. Thanks, y'all. I'm gonna do one more to close it out, a song. Thank you so much for your attention. I can feel you and hear you. Stay in school, brush your teeth, etc. Abolish the police, my partner kindly reminds me from Offsides. Oh my God, I'm God. And what I thought was wrong. Oh my eyes were not my eyes. What I saw was never mine. It was never mine. Never mine. It was never mine. It was never mine. My life, I'm life. Here I thought I wasn't I. All my years, my fears, I find I cannot find what was never mine. Oh, what was never mine. Never mind. What was never mine. Never mind. No, it's never mine. Never mind. Even though it's never mine. My God, I'm God, and what I thought was wrong. All my life, I'm life, and here I thought I wasn't I. I wasn't I. I was never mine. I was never mine. Never mine. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shira. Thanks for being open to this format and also for taking a chance on us with the fresh new poems. That was lovely.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. I am really happy to introduce Ross Gay. Ross Gay is the author of 4 books of poetry and 1 book of essays, The Book of Delights. Ross is a founding board member of the Bloomington Community Orchard, a nonprofit free fruit for all justice and joy project. He also works on the Tenderness Project with Shayla Lawson in Essence, London. He's received fellowships from Kaveh Khanum, the Bread Loaf Writers Conference, and the Guggenheim Foundation. And here's the business right here. Ross is a teacher. He's a super taster. He's a painter. He's a man who says what needs saying. He's a basketball player. He's the kind of person who carries fruit in his pockets and will offer it to you. He's a storyteller. He's someone who leans into the sunlight. He's quick to kindness. He's a skateboarder, and he can laugh and grin and dance like nobody's business. I'm very pleased to welcome Ross Gay.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be with you all, and it's it's just so fun to read with you all and to be together. And Nicole, I'm glad to be, in your company and in the care of your company. So this feels amazing and exciting. I'm going to read a little bit from this book called Beholding, and it's a long poem. It's a book-length poem, and it's kind of like, you'll see, but I'll say just a little bit. It kind of focuses on this move. It spends a lot of time looking at this move by a basketball player named Dr. J, or Julius Erving. Some people don't know who Dr. J is, which is why I said it like that. And it's, but it goes off in many places. And, one of the things with reading a long poem that takes, it only takes an hour and 20 minutes to read, but to read a little fragment of it is that you just kind of know it's automatic that it's going to be a kind of, it's just going to be what it is. It's not the whole thing. Anyway, this is called Beholding. And it has a bounded gratitude at the beginning. This poem does not exist without the work and ideas and words of many, many writers and thinkers, among them Amiri Baraka, Garnet Cadigan, Tor Derricotte, Adeselius Girmay, Saidiya Hartman, Alan Iverson, Fred Moten, Kevin Quashie, Patrick Rosal, Christina Sharp, and Susan Sontag, by which I mean the work and thinking and care and words are indebted to them and are sometimes actually theirs. And there's an epigraph, to be held, to behold. That's Christina Sharp in The Wake on Blackness and Being. Beholding. April 4th, 2015 till today. And you might have noticed there's nowhere to go. The wind cutting little eddies at your collarbones and behind your ear. As Dr. J drives from the foul line extended to the baseline, defended valiantly by Mark Landsberger, who, in this poem, despite the doofy urge to make him so, is not allegorical, but is rather simply a hard-working journeyman ball player with decent athleticism and size and a floppy mop of dusty blonde hair got caught up in the gust, sliding his size 16s quick so that Doc, after catching the ball at the elbow and taking one hard dribble toward the baseline, where the dunk would usually commence, could not access the paint or the lane or the key, which is what we call the area nearest the goal, which in this case is an iron hole drawn in space and therefore implies a window, though the key makes it also a door that Landsberger, it seemed, was trying to keep shut. And so Doc leapt. He left his feet, which means more or less jumping with the ball with nowhere to go, and which we're warned against by coaches from day one for the ensuing requisite stupid pass, or more simply, though no less stupid, travel, also called walking, which the leaping often leads to. Keep your feet, again and again, which makes the leaping, leaving your feet, sound sacrificial. The way in certain places, certain countries, or countries inside of countries, you must leave by foot with nowhere to go, which there is. And Doc, you should note, after the one dribble, clasps the ball with only his right hand without once at all in any shape or form using the left, which, among other things, friends, differentiates this from all the descendant moves. Kevin Durant, Dwayne Wade, Steph and Giannis and Harden and Kawhi, yes, and Bron too. I shall not be moved. And using only one hand, which is amazing, but not yet miraculous, more a physical and therefore genetic fact, thanks Ma and Pa Irvin, Doc's hand becomes an octopus, gripping the ball nothing like prey. And with that ball snugged in his mid, Doc maybe kind of sort of thought something like, I'm gonna put this schmuck, the schmuck in this case being Landsberger, though do not please revert to a simplistic allegorization of the journeyman, which word I repeat advisedly, on a poster. Though schmuck is a word I'd be surprised to hear Doc say. And the word posterize, common usage, posterize his ass, you might be thinking is a bit of an anachronism in this poem, in this move, which ostensibly occurred in the 1980 NBA Finals. Though we all know that nothing happens only when it happens. We all know nothing happens only when it happens. Emerging more in the epic, which in the NBA lasts 3 to 5 years following Doc's retirement. Neek and Jordan, Hakeem the Dream and Clyde the Glide, Barkley the Glove, and yo, remember Sean Kemp? Though Doc probably thought it anyway, visionary that he was, when will they verb what I keep doing to these schmucks, especially Bill fucking Walton? Driving from the foul line extended toward the baseline, as the unsuspecting Landsberger, who did a fine job of shuffling his size 16s and not holding, keeping Irving from the key, and who must for a scant and fleeting moment have felt a degree of pride when Doc, after the hard dribble right, left his feet with nowhere to go. Billy Cunningham on the sideline, his hands on his hips, his sport coat thrown open, a few strands of his hair stuck to his moist pink brow, and almost smiling as Doc began sailing out of bounds over the baseline. and Landsberger, a solid leaper, skied and foreclosed the possibility of Doc sneaking a shot in this side of the basket, by which I mean dunking probably very hard, by putting his hand against the backboard, a big door swinging shut. At which fine and commendable defensive effort, Irving simply decided in the air to knock on more doors by soaring more. Have you ever decided anything in the air? Turtling his head into his chest so as not to bash it against the backboard. Flying like that, in fact, now behind the basket and backboard, where Kareem, a good help defender, wait a minute, that's not right. Kareem, one of the best defenders of all time, 5-time NBA All Defensive First Team, 6-time NBA All Defensive Second Team, 6 MVPs, sorry MJ, not to mention, which means it requires mentioning, Kareem was one of those Negroes they changed the rules for, banning the dunk for years from the NCAA, which is to say banning emphatic and exquisite flight, which maybe explains the wise and sort of tired eyes of Kareem, one of the best basketball players of all time, who had slid also to cut off the baseline, which he accomplished, but found himself now looking into the sky directly out of bounds, which his own suddenly unfamiliar body must have been telling him was so weird. This is so weird. Looking and looking like this, his hands extended timidly, a silver maple's branches creaking and swaying in a hurricane, for Doc was amongst the trees, as we call the big men, like Kareem, the trees, who reside mostly in the lane or in the key, growing there, rooting, the thousands of fans now holding their breath, looking into the sky, some of their hands reaching out instinctively toward their neighbors beside them, or their palms instinctively laying on the shoulders before them, or forearms shoved gently into a wrist or hip beside them. A few strangers suddenly lock arms as if going for a stroll, and the whole of the spectrum becomes a kind of dew-glistened web, shivering its gems in the gales as Irving went higher and now began to extend his right hand in a precise arc, beginning precisely above his head, painting a broad and precise circle, not unlike Leonardo's Vitruvian Man in his hula hoop of perfect proportions, if that little naked man wasn't naked and was palming a basketball and was flying through the trees. And I find myself again and again with my arm making the perfectly impossible circle again and again as I watch this clip on YouTube, frame by frame, clumsily, on a computer with gummy keys and a post-it note covering the eye hole scrawled discipline. On April 5th, 2015, at 1:48 a.m., again and again thinking, what am I looking at? What am I seeing? Back to the first long step toward the baseline, the slight contact with Landsberger, the leap again, contact, step, leap again, long step, contact, leap again, long step, contact, leap. And I noticed this time in the background, which is granted hazy, this being old footage and my eyes a bit roomy for the now nearly 2 hours studying this clip, I notice at about the foul line, Silk, AKA Jamal Wilkes, who, for the record, Coach Wooden, on the record, said was his best player ever at UCLA. Not Kareem and, oh, fuck forever, Bill Walton. And it's worthwhile to spend at least a moment with the name Silk, among the finest basketball nicknames, implying an ease and fluidity of movement, implying a difficult thing, a painful thing made to look easy, a fiber prized for its softness, its smoothness on the skin, gathered from captive worms fed mulberry leaves. My court name was Beast, for what it's worth. And after a summer league game on the court at 10th and Lombard, where those in the know would slide through a gap in the grimace of the wrought iron gate to get in, a court that would be, in time, shut down in the most heinous of ways, removing the rim. the backboards lonely as gravestones. Because of complaints to the city from the condo owners across the street who did not want to hear, God forbid, all that Negro gathering and celebration and care and delight every goddamn weekend morning, all that frolic and tumult and flight. Why can't they just go someplace else? A slightly older opponent told me, holding my hand and shoulder and pulling me close, he was holding me, beneath the stately oaks overhanging the court, looking kindly down on us and time to time blocking a high arcing shot and wishing a leaf or two upon the ex-ballers on the sidelines, reading the Philadelphia Inquirer, sipping coffee, debating and laughing and acting stupid like refs making calls. Oh yeah, he walked his ass off. The oaks dappling the old heads and their discourse, the best line of verse I will ever write. His shirt soaked through, staring at me to be sure I was listening, which I was, then as now. You ain't no beast. You ain't no beast. You're a man, you hear me? I noticed Silk's right leg and hip twitch before relaxing with what might have been the body's, shit. Though if you look closely again and again in a certain kind of way, again and again, you'll notice what might be a kind of light descending upon Silk's high cheekbones and forehead, again and again, unfurling almost across his face as he cranes his neck toward the soaring, until you'd almost swear tonight at 2:26 a.m. he was looking into a tree strewn with people, the human-shaped shadows twisting across his body, the legs swaying into his torso, a gray hand birding across his face, resting for a second at his ear. The pinky become a beak from which wheezed a tiny song, you'd swear. Watching this sliver of the clip again and again, the shadow of one man's head seeming to lay itself on Silk's chest, for which in the clip you'll see Silk make of his arm a kind of cradle, lowering his head as though to say, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. With which the tree makes a kind of choir moaning, I'm so sorry. Twisting its roots in the molder with what they've been made to do. Wait, what am I looking at? What am I practicing? It's not that. No, it's not that. It's late. My eyes are playing tricks, for this tree is like the biggest uncle at the biggest family reunion, holding its flung open arms. 9 guys, both raucous and rapt, hollering and smacking hands and holding each other, cooing like lovebirds for the flight they're amidst, in one of the house's best seats at Rucker Park in Harlem, where the young, as yet unpseudonymous Julius Irving, just a college kid from UMass, has begun his extended course of study on gravity and grace, which has so enthralled the throngs. Some kids scale the court's chain link fence looking like belly-bared scarabs with bell bottoms and Chuck Taylors, and some peer from the bridge beyond. The traffic itself slowed, and a couple hundred lounge precariously on ledges outside school windows, backpacks tucked in their laps or under their butts, one boy laying on his side with a small stack of school books wedged beneath his close-shorn head, the algebraic equations tumbling into his ear as he looks drowsily down on the court and beyond from the ledge, his left arm dangling and casting slow eddies into the air. And do you know, while composing this, I almost dreamed some doom upon that child, dozing beautifully in my poem, dreaming now above the flying. What am I looking at? What am I practicing? He sprawled there in the sun, easy as a lizard, while the gangly fella below, with knee-high socks and well-shaped fro and the wispy beginnings of a goatee and a mouth perched somewhere between "you better not" and "isn't this lovely," with little fanfare, though no small delight, again and again flies to the rim. I'm gonna stop there.
Thank you, Ross. Thank
Welcome.
you so much for that. that was gorgeous. And I hope that you have a chance to talk a little bit about what occasioned this book length
Mm,
and the project of that book.
yeah.
And also, I agree, Kareem, he does have some tired looking eyes. He's just like,
Yeah. Yep. He knows. He knows.
he really is. Right now, I would love to invite Saeed and we're gonna do the Q&A. So Shira and Saeed, if you could
Hi.
mute yourselves and get back to the Q&A.
Hello. Here's Caesar.
Oh,
Here's this.
You know, there's a lot of people who want to ask you a lot of questions, and this was a very fun chat to read during your readings. So I'm gonna get out of the way, but before I do, I want to thank you all so much for coming and for sharing and for that Al Green line. You keep me walking in my shoes with all this beautiful work. So thank you.
Thank you.
I am going to be fielding questions from the audience, but first I want to introduce everyone to our co-sponsors who are on the screen as well. Sarah Height and Janae Schoenfeld are representing the English department tonight. Chris Kennerly is representing the ODEI, and Aaliyah Daniels is our student representative. She's also a Kenyon Review Associate. And we're gonna do a little juggling act of taking questions from the audience and then questions from our co-sponsors as well. And I'm gonna ask the first question and actually answer it. This comes from Sarah. She's asking if it is possible to get a list of poems that were read today and the books. So Sarah and everyone else, I will point you to our brilliant Twitter feed that has been run by our interns. And they have been posting throughout the night the poems that everyone has been reading. And also in your chat, you will see a link to the bookshop page where you can purchase the books. And I'll remind you here that we are going to do a book giveaway at the end of this Q&A. So 20 of you will receive free books from our artists tonight. And now I will send it over to Janae for a question.
Thank you. And thanks also on behalf of the English department to all of you for sharing your powerful words with us this evening. Saeed, you prefaced your reading with a comment, and I didn't type it quite out, but with a comment about the way the past informs the present in your work. And also, boy, howdy, did it resonate when you mentioned your Black History Month angst about being looked at by everyone who's trying not to look at you.
Just a little, just a little. It's fine. It's fine.
Yeah, I've been there. And Ross, you repeated the line in your poem, "We all know nothing happens only when it happens." And Shira, you evoked, I think, a cosmic entity that has been there from the beginning of time. So I wondered if you all might speak a bit about how you navigate the resonances of the past, especially the past of America's dark racial history in your work.
Can you say the last part of that question?
Yeah, how do you navigate the resonances of the past, particularly the American racial past, in your poetry?
You mean like America?
Pretty much. It's never done, but it seems like it filters through in some powerful ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for me, you know, losing my mother almost a decade ago was the key that kind of locked open, I think, this relationship to history, because that's what grief is, right? You know, it deconstructs not just your relationship to a person, but you're in the present, but everything in the present, you know, unexpectedly is triggering thoughts about the past. And of course, thoughts about the past are painful because they just kind of underscore your new relationship to your future, right? You know, you keep going, oh, that reminds me of that, and that will never happen again. And, you know, and so I think in grieving my mother and writing about that phenomenon, and then of course, you know, just being human, growing, living, time moving on, living through the last year where you start to feel like, well, you know, I got to be in the hospital with my mother. I got to, you know, and the humility, you know, I think it has opened me up to thinking about, you know, going from the personal to the political grief, and that's what history. So I guess, you know, I would say poetry, as someone who loves writing, you know, in all kinds of mediums, I think poetry is the space that I go to when I'm trying to capture those multiple contexts, past, present, and future. I think, you know, in prose it's very difficult because prose, we have expectations. We're kind of like, slow down, paint the scene. What was she wearing? What are you talking about? What's, you know, there's, you have to, you know, you can't just run. And, you know, on Twitter or writing for visual mediums, there are these different expectations. But I think because of poetry's relationship to song and the lyric, the reader and the writer, we have a different leniency or expectation about what's possible. And I think it's kind of, you know, nothing only happens when it happens. That kind of is poetry. And so I think being able to zigzag between those different planes of awareness or circumstance feels, at least for me, most possible in a poem.
What about you, Shira?
Well, I was just trying to roll out that red carpet for you. Technically.
Doing it for each other.
Well, I guess the question is hitting me on a few levels because I like to make art in many ways, and I think there are different responsibilities or consequences of writing a song versus making a claim in a poem versus making a painting for someone to witness, and who you are making that painting and what it's of. And so I think if I just speak to poetry, two of the main questions that I think about that I think are an inheritance from Mary Oliver, and also from Baldwin, and also from Wisława Szymborska, and also from Audre Lorde, the questions that kind of populate me are you know, are you paying attention? Basically, fundamentally, are you paying attention? And then secondly, like, are you sure? Are you honest about how you're paying attention? And I think that those two questions, they can be applied obviously to race, to gender, to sexuality, to just how loving a human being is or doesn't have access to. And so I think, you know, whenever I come to the page, and I think in concentric circles of intimacy. So my first circle is like by myself, and then with maybe Angel, my partner, and then maybe with a crew of writers. And then I'm saying it to you guys on the web. But in the first circle of that concentric circle, you know, the people who really are a part of my process, and I think we always have people that are a part of our process. Even Emily Dickinson had letter writing that she had. So other people were a part of her process. Their job is to be confrontational with me, another Baldwin moment, right? That if I love you, I'm going to make you conscious of the things that you don't want to be conscious of. And so I think, you know, Oumuamua, which you just referenced, Janae, like the idea is, am I really a singular being? Can I feel what moves, you know, in outer space? Sure, metaphorically. But am I attuned enough to consider that I'm not a noun and that I'm a verb, and that I am in constant conversation with other verbs? And, you know, politics, racism, sexism loves to concretize. It loves to create ice out of river. And I think that poetry does an incredible job of melting that and creating a more queer investigation of what it really is to fucking be here. It's strange. It's not organized. It appears organized, but it's really not that organized. So I look to the poets to confront me and let me know that they're on my side in that confrontation. Ross?
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's a beautiful question. And I feel like the older I get, the more I realize that I'm contending with it on all these levels, some like sort of like active, sort of conscious and obvious levels, and then levels that are like really epigenetic, you know, like really that there is all of this sort of information that I'm hauling around and sort of like contending with, and or not contending with, but it's contending with me, something like that. And that part of my practice is to kind of try to figure out what that is, what is that stuff that's contending with me, although I don't know it's contending with me, or that I'm contending with, but don't yet know how to contend with, those kinds of things. I feel sort of deeply in that moment right now, where the sort of, even like sort of like fixed notions of identity, like even like an individual's identity, are feeling like, a little bit like the question of like, the individual self, being sort of actually in some kind of relationship to the moon, or, the tree outside, which we are, whether or not we're attending to it or practicing it. The more I sort of think of that and try to understand and practice that, the more I think, wow, like it is just a mystery. It's a mystery. And part of what's interesting to me is like trying to hold mystery and contend with mystery, not to make it go away, but to kind of try to hold it, be with it, be held by it.
Mm.
That's beautiful. Thank you. I'm going to take a question that starts with Emily, and it's specific to Ross, but actually some other people have asked it more generally. So Ross, Emily writes, your poem, Catalog of Unabashed Gratitude, saved my life. I was in the thralls of addiction when I found that poem, and your book of the same name helped turn my life around. The question, though, that is asked by multiple people, including Emily, for all of you, can you briefly describe how you remain motivated to keep on writing in the hardest of times?
I think this is true. Let's see. I think I am interested in like the older I get, I feel like there's like an age when you can start to say that and you can't say that. Like, when you're like 28 and you say that, I'm like, shut the fuck up. Unless you're like my 40 times getting a little slower, it's like, but the older I get, I'm 46. The older I get, the more I'm just like, my writing life is interested in, or my writing life is wrapped up in like my questions. And I have no shortage of questions, and the older I get, the questions grow, and the questions about what I thought I knew grow too, which is so sort of fun and troubling and, wonderful. It's like all of this sort of, the word I'm using to describe it to myself is like all these unfixings of identity or understanding or selfness in a certain kind of way. So, like, in a certain kind of way, that to me, writing, not all the time, but sometimes I think part of what it is from me is actually contending with what is difficult, or with what, I mean, it's almost always contending with what is difficult, but it's also maybe in some way contending with the thing that might also make me not want to write. You know what I'm saying? Something like that. But yeah, I also want to say like community, like community, I just want to say that.
Yeah, I mean, as someone who, struggles and really empathizes with you, depression, anxiety in particular, wear me out, and are artistic collaborators with me, longtime artistic collaborators. I would say, if the question is like, how do I keep writing when I'm really struggling? I would say, frankly, that I don't. When I'm really struggling, I'm not. I'm not. I think when I was earlier in my practice, and I think it's important when we are earlier in our artistic practices, I think it's important to stretch and to try to write under different circumstances, and to see, we say we only like writing at night. Well, wake up and try writing in the morning, you know what I mean? And see, you don't know what you don't know. Or I've learned, like, sister girl, like, I can't have a glass of wine and write. It's just not going to happen for me. Tried it, didn't love it, and so I would say, that is actually akin to, when I'm really struggling, I am the work. My work is my practice in that moment, is to, or day or whatever week, is to get myself to a more sustainable place. And that's what I always think of, just when we're under, mental, emotional, physical duress. It's not a stable, sustainable space in which to be. And yeah, I've tried in the past to say, okay, this is the time to write, and it isn't for me. It may be for other people. I have found consistently that the passage of time, and the passage of health and circumstance has never, in some, and I'm really thinking, I don't think I've never, yeah, it's never lessened the art that may be birthed by, the experience, whether that is, writing about a relationship, it doesn't matter whether it's months later, years later. I've never tried to write about an experience that really mattered to me with the passage of time, and been in a better, different space, and been like, oh, I can't get it, I can't reach it. I don't think that kind of suffering is a requisite. So that's what I would say. I think, when you are feeling good and the work is the words and the art, that's the work. And when you can't access that, I think that's a signal to yourself that the work is something different, and that is valid, and just as significant as, any line of poetry you would write.
Yeah, I think so many beautiful, really concrete things were just brought to the forefront that I want to echo. The sense of curiosity that you fundamentally don't know more than you know, and starting there. So walking around your house and being like, I say to students, pick 10 things you don't understand, like the oven. How does that work? Or, like my cat, like how, or a book, like it has all these words, it's sitting on the shelf. When I open it, I'm able to access information. Like these are all weird things. And so I think maintaining an openness, like Ross was saying about, just a curiosity. And then the community aspect, I think, is really important, and often just totally overlooked in an individualistic kind of John Wayne culture that's like, you just come out genius, and it's like, no, that I write just like among the people that I share with, we all write horrible drafts, just stinky, foul drafts. And we have the community to kind of, figure that stinkiness out. I also just want to put out there that to echo Saeed about moods, that really when you understand what you are after as a practice, and I wish that word had been offered to me as a younger poet, as opposed to just like poems, you write poems. It's like, well, no, I practice, I have a practice. And so as an athlete, that made total sense to me. It wasn't like I wasn't a soccer player on the off season. I was a soccer player, and I had to take care of myself, and I had to notice what I was doing on the off season. And so we all have off seasons where we're not really writing. For me, I like to play music or to paint or to read a ton. And I don't consider that not a part of my practice. And so I think, I encourage you to figure out for yourself, what is my practice? Like, I love that Saeed said, wine can't be a part of my practice at this point in this window in time, right? And so figure out for yourself, it's going to be different than me. It's going to be different than Saeed and Ross, right? Like, what are the things that are my tripwires? What are the things that are my cheerleaders? And how can I be space for both of them to show up? I think that, like, I just have to say one last thing as like a mentally ill person and poet, that I often feel like I'm shepherded into conversations about mania or depression as modes of production, which is a deeply capitalist way of looking at illness. Like, wow, our artists were so productive when they were in their worst soulful like place. And for me, I'm just kind of like, only speaking as Shira, yeah, I've made things in manic periods. I've made things in depressed periods. I've also made things like in absolutely bored periods. I've made things in really unideal periods. And so I think there's this, and I really get this from what Ross was saying, there's kind of this opening up and saying the expansiveness of the human experience, which includes me as a writer, that's allowed. And I'm going to, instead of being judgmental or clinging to the ones that are working or are right, I'm going to be open to my particular path as I discover it.
Thank you. Aaliyah, what's your question?
Hi.
Hi, Leah.
So I have a question specifically based off of one of my favorite quotes by Saeed, if that's okay. So one of my favorite quotes by you is about brutality and violence and how that tells the stories of survivors and that we often need to hear those stories. I wanted to know what you and then also the other poets, what do you think about violence as a means to create something beautiful? I recently just had a conversation with another Black woman about how creating art and violence creates something, makes it kind of beautiful and that weird paradox. So I was wondering what you guys thought about that.
That's a wonderful question, in part because I think it makes space for the fact that, like, violence is a neutral phenomenon. I am still thinking about, I haven't even watched her second Instagram live, but Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's first Instagram live about the Capitol Hill insurrection, which I think everyone should watch. I think it's just like an instant classic American text, that should be a part of our tradition. But she talks about trauma. And she said the thing about, trauma is, something that's like too much, too soon, too fast. And I think that is what violence is. And so, that can be a weather phenomenon. As someone who grew up in Tornado Alley, that can be an action that a person or culture has, enacted on a person or group of people. And it can also, I think, be an impact. I think erasure. I think, misgendering, dead naming people. I think I'm thinking about Chloe Bailey of Chloe and Halle and Megan Thee Stallion and the way that the energy that we saw, or the lack of energy in terms of like the way they're treated, it's just not there. I think that's a kind of violence. Can something beautiful come out of it? Sure. I believe so, but it's kind of like what Shira was saying. It's almost like our conversations about mania and about artists who have struggled and the depths. It's I think our culture has a tendency to try to say, well, because something beautiful came out of whatever happened, it was worth it. And that's not quite how I feel. I think what is actually probably more accurate is that human resilience and our need to create narrative, our need to create purpose out of everything that happens to us is a beautiful and stunning part of our humanity. You know what I mean? But I've certainly never been, and I've been through some violent experiences myself. I've never wished or been grateful for the violent experience. But like, well, the book I got of it was, no, I do not feel that way. I would have happily written a book about something else, maybe. And I, I certainly feel that way for other people. When we think about police brutality, or even just grief. I mean, I remember people coming up to me, within. I mean, at my mom's funeral, actually, and saying, but you're gonna, beautiful writing will come out of this one day. And it's just like, I don't want that. That's not my relationship to this, So yeah, I think we're always grappling with, but yeah, it's possible, but I don't think anyone hopes for it.
I'm going to do another combining of questions here from the audience. There's a lot of comments about how all of you create works that reflect your life. They're autobiographical, they're genuine, they're elements of the personal in your work. What are the benefits of that? And then what are the difficulties? And then I'll also throw in there another question. How do you create an appropriate distance so that you can write on them in a true way?
wait, are y'all looking at the memoir right? Like, is that, I was like looking at Shira and I was like, wait a minute, what's going on? Here's what I would say. As someone who's, just gone deep down that road, um, the good. It is always powerful to be able to contextualize your own experience. It doesn't heal, it may not make you feel better, but I think that's the power of history, which is what I keep returning to. That's why history is so important, because having like the record will always give you some kind of footing with which to move forward. It is wonderful to see that in diving into the particulars of my own experience and circumstance, how much of it resonates. It was I find and found with my book that the more I just stopped worrying about other people, stopped worrying about relatable or what, just writing what I know and just trying to capture my past as best I could. The degree that I did that, it just felt like it just multiplied the degree to which actually people related to it in unexpected ways. You know what I mean? I've had great conversations with like white grandmothers from the Pacific Northwest about my memoir, and I certainly wasn't kind of thinking about that, but there, you don't know. What's challenging, particularly about a book, is as Shira and Ross know, there's such a lag time. It's like a shooting star and you're at the front of it and readers are way at the back of the tail. And so, it's a bit challenging, I think, because people have a very immediate reaction and we have immediate means to communicate. So I can't tell you how many Instagram and Twitter DMs I get from people who literally have just finished the book. I can tell that they're like, and they'll say like crying as I read the book. People have like made art of like, and if you read my memoir, like they've sent me art they've made of the botanist chapters of the book, which is like, oh, I don't know if I would have, okay. So it's, people respond. And there's people know a lot about you. And that can be, just a little strange that I think sometimes, particularly I would say as a Black man, as a Black queer artist, and we're always being commodified, like talking about Black History Month. I've had moments where I've had to kind of define some boundaries. I did an event once at a school, and actually she was like the coordinator for the event, and I think she said it after. I don't think she said it in front of people, but she said, I just, that was so wonderful, so great. I just want to adopt you. I just want to be your mom. And I was and I was like, okay, bye. And I like literally like grabbed my bag and was like hightailing it out of there. So I think, yeah, it's like you're both inviting people in, but as you would with any guest in your home, I think we all have boundaries. I think we would all go, excuse me, this is my personal bathroom. The guest bathroom is downstairs. Thank you. And that's kind of what it's like.
Yeah, like Saeed, I had a great moment. So I have this little book of essays called the Book of Delights, and it's really like daily, and it's really like in a certain kind of way personal, and but in a way like the dailiness of it or something. But I remember walking into a coffee shop and a friend who we're not like good friends, but we're friends. And we know each other. We recognize each other I walked in the coffee shop and she was sitting there with her kid or something. She was staring at me like she didn't recognize me. And I was like, hey, it's me. And she was like, I feel like I've been with you for like every day for a year. So she was like, I think she was trying to negotiate the boundary. She's like, Dan, you're all in my space, man. But I do feel like it is like a kind of negotiation. Like, again, like what Saeed was saying about like people having the experience and then you're like, oh, right, that book, I actually wrote that book like 5 years ago. And it feels, just because it came out 2 years ago and someone read it last night is not. So that kind of, thing is interesting. But I also think it's interesting even to contend with the question of like what constitutes writing about oneself and what constitutes not writing about oneself. So just to raise that to consciousness as a not totally definable thing, which is to say that someone who is not writing about themselves or someone who is writing objective something non-subjective, it's not that. and someone who's writing very subjective and like, and I know this as someone who writes, you know, stuff that's apparently very personal. I know that there's also the kind of there's a version, there's a kind of versioning that's always happening, you know, like the sentences that I say in my books, I don't say it quite like that in my life, you know, like et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a kind of, there's a, yeah, I just want to sort of be like, you know, I think it's useful for us to consider that what we do not always consider personal might actually be personal, you know, and vice versa.
Yeah, Elizabeth, is it okay? Do you want to move to the next?
Yeah, do you want to add anything before?
I'll add something small, which is no matter what you write, people will bring their own assumptions and perspectives to it. I feel like I've given PowerPoint presentations sometimes when I read about bipolar and about my experience, and someone will still say something like absurd to me afterwards. Like, I've taken Tylenol, I really relate, you know, like literally. And so that's actually very freeing. I think it's like that, I think it's Zora Neale Hurston's quote, that if they'll kill you and say you liked it, that line, I always get it wrong. There's a certain responsibility to yourself that goes beyond caretaking for other people's experience of you. So that's one thing I'll say. And then the other little thing is that I found that the more that I went into my I, like my I letter, in terms of Odes to Lithium, let's say, the more that, like Martina Spada says, and I'm sure many poets say, like the more specific you get, the more universal. And so I like sometimes now when I'm investigating, as Ross is suggesting, that I, like who do I think who do I think that I is? And often I find that there's like a secret we inside that I, and I think that's what Saeed is kind of pointing to, is like, what the hell is this, white woman from wherever, who's elderly, connecting with my book in this way? But I too have found that that we don't get to choose the secret we, but we're writing for them nonetheless. And that is something to keep in mind while you're writing. I might be going really deep into my specific hospitalization, let's say, but then that might be a actual internal gathering that I'm creating for others to step into. And so, yeah, I actually wonder, I constantly wonder in my own investigation if there is an I, like if there is, I don't know if it's like a real thing, because even poems I'll read that I wrote before, I'm like, is that me? Like, that feels like a different I. So who is that and who was that, So just expanding, I really appreciate Ross just kind of like expanding, what are we even asking in terms of that? So just wanted to pop in and say that.
Well, that's great. That's so good. And you're right. We connect with an individual person's story because of the we in us all. I want to give Chris and Sarah a chance to ask their questions too, because we are so grateful for our co-sponsors, but that means we are going to miss some of these questions, but maybe you all are connecting to the we in the audience and your question is going to be their question. So Chris, what is your question?
Okay, thank you to all of the artists tonight. So my question is, what are your thoughts about using art in general, and more specifically your own work, as an effective means for protest and activism?
I'll say something quickly that just came to my mind, which is that one thing is I feel like I make work, and my work is engaged with the questions it's engaged with, and then it's useful or becomes part of other questions and other things. So it's interesting, just on the one hand, of like making work out of deep and abiding questions, which is sort of how I think about what I do. those deep and abiding questions have many are tied into many of the questions, but I think it's an interesting question just in terms of like the art being made as protest, and art being made as a kind of activism, both of which can happen, I guess. But right when you said it, I thought, oh, it's interesting, like the difference between making it for the purpose of, say, protest, and the work being used for the purpose of protest, or being useful for protest. So I just want to like sort of say that's an interesting thing that I thought. I mean, that was interesting to me that I thought of.
I love this question. It used to be something I really struggled with, Chris. I remember. I'm thinking in particular, like of the initial Black Lives Matter protests. Gosh, I hate to use people's names to define eras, but let's say after Trayvon Martin was killed, and there would be, particularly in New York where I was living at the time, and there would be poetry, and I remember like going through my work and kind of agonizing because I was worried that I didn't have poems that were clearly political enough. I'm a Black queer body. I am inherently political. America decided that for me before I decided anything else. So I understood that, but I remember being like insecure. Is this like Hanifa Derby had those poems. I write poems about flowers at a time like this. And I remember kind of feeling that way. I think as I've grown up a bit more, embraced different writing styles, developed more confidence, had career affirmed confidence, it's gotten easier for me to see, no, this will work. But I also just feel, I don't know, I mean, particularly in the last few years, yeah, I feel like I've been galvanized, electrified a bit by circumstance. I am not angry, but I live with rage in a different way than I did before, as I think many of us do. And so now when I write, like those early poems I read, those first two poems I read, and I made the Black History Month comment, I was not thinking about Black History Month when I wrote them. Those poems, I believe, are written like a year apart, totally different circumstance, but I'm living with these experiences, so even though when I'm writing I have a very almost like microbiotic kind of focused, I think all of that then floods in. And I think, there's probably a lot more protest art right now as there was in, the late 60s, because it's about the time in which that art is existing.
There we are. I think you can perhaps sense some ambivalence, or it's difficult. I'm hearing that a little bit in the because I think Saeed pointed out intention, and actually Ross too, like what's the intention of the piece you're making? It might then shift and be utilized in some capacity of protest, or I think for depending on your identity as a kind of what's the word, like expression, like here's a queer woman's poem, here's what it does as a queer artifact, kind of what's placed on that poem without its maybe consent in some way. But yeah, I don't know. I'm thinking, I'm like, yeah, I know that Nina Simone, for me personally, like I know that she was huge in terms of obviously being a part of like civil rights and literally singing and literally being present at protests and things like that. And yet, like in terms of her mental illness, spoke so candidly about it, but wasn't quote unquote an activist, but I would consider those kind of equal. And so I think maybe for me, I try to find like, in what ways can the activism have nothing to do with what I'm making, but be activated in my own life in the ways that I move about the world. But then also that no matter what, these will become artifacts of a life that is living that way, right? So if I'm living my life that way, my poems should reflect that. And I think for me, just as a charge in terms of whiteness, I often think about what doesn't make it into the poems, or like what doesn't make it into the conversations with my mom. and kind of using that as, oh, what isn't in this space? I think of like Wisława Szymborska says, after every war, someone has to clean up. And so, you know, someone cleaned up at the Capitol, and who is, you know, where's the caretaking for them? And so my heart kind of wants to travel along the spaces in which I have just invisibles, like things that I've been socialized not to see or not to write about, and then to bring them in, but not to do it in a way that is intending force or activism in that way, but to do it in a way that reflects my actual living, doesn't justify some big crusade, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I also want to add, if I can, like if there is something about poetry, maybe, that kind of disrupts the logics of our being, that disrupts the grammars even of the way that we think things are or ought to be. If there's something sort of foundationally or fundamentally disruptive about a poem, that to me already starts, whether or not, however the poem is sort of activated, or if the possibility, I'd say, of like the poem as a sort of, even in its sort of origin or genesis, is sort of a practice, or has the connection to the practices of radical disruption of understanding, which to me, I just want to also just sort of float that whether or not the poem gets sort of used or has a certain kind of activation, you know, regardless of the activation, the instance itself, or even the sort of act of whatever you call it, disruption or profound self-inquiry or music making or you know, the reaching that a poem is, it's already like, even you hear those things saying, it's like, oh yeah, that's like, okay, that's active. That's a thing.
I keep reading Saeed's sign behind him, silence is complicity. And with the work that you're doing, it is not silence. It's the opposite of that. Sarah, bring us home. Last question.
Part of me wants to kind of disrupt the process of question asking and just enthuse a series of thank yous and gratitudes, and to put voice to the outpouring of excitement and thanks that has been coming up the chat through this entire evening. And I will say that, like, having spent time inside all of your work and having spent time with students inside all of your work this first couple weeks of our semester, like, I feel I owe you, and I know a bunch of people who are on this event specifically, I can attest to the fact that they owe you a debt of gratitude. So thank you for doing all of the heart-filled and risky and caretaking and careful and thoughtful work, and attending to what your practice is that has made it possible for us to have this kind of rich set of interactions within what you've given us. I mean, and so somehow I want to ask a question that makes a space for you to, like, I don't know, for you to, I hope, feel cared for one more time while you're here. I'm interested in what it is that's helping you or allowing you to, like, survive and live right now. Like, what are the things that are feeding you, that are helping you feel joy or delight or kind of provocation toward survival, as we're in this wild moment that we're in, this wild life that we're in.
I can say a little thing. The birds around here seem to make a song when spring starts to come. And that's one little thing I want to say. I might have more to say.
Shira, I feel like we're like playing like you tell? Because I
astounded.
know I'm not looking directly like that, but
I feel like I'm astounded at Ross's ingenuity there to be like, here's a tiny little thing. Like I
that
kind
was
of want to
really
add a
good. Oh my
tiny
God.
thing. And then when I was thinking, what is wrong with me that I don't have like a tiny thing I can add to this? So yeah, I don't know.
I guess I would say, uh, this kind of gets to that earlier question about like, creating art, when you're really struggling. And for me, I'm like, I don't. Reading, and the kind of the literary phenomenon, that part of the life is difficult for me to access. It's hard for me to concentrate on books. If I read one news article a week to the end, it's an impressive undertaking, long form journalism, who a lot of the things that I think typically I gravitate towards. It's just difficult right now. I'm just not there. So, um, lately in the last few, I mean, obviously my dog is just really a truly, he's a gift. He's a gift. But like TikTok, because I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm lately I'm drawn to, and I think this is the poet in me. I'm drawn to unexpected circumstances for wonder, and where you go, oh, it didn't occur to me that something like that could happen here, right? And and I think TikTok really epitomizes that, and watching like today TikToks about the Gorilla Glue thing, home, all of it, and it's just, it's, just the cleverness, the wit, the technical, I mean, the way, people edit their TikToks even, stuns me. I've been playing Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and it is a feat of storytelling. It is an incredible. I keep being like, it's like a movie, and then I'm like, no, this could not be a movie. It actually is way too expansive for that, and the way that the game embraces silence, or its attention to detail for the wildflowers that are in different regions and landscape. It's very specific and authentic, and I just have these moments of true wonder while playing this video game, which, I think as a kid of the 90s, we were raised to think, in a really, to really look down on it as a medium. It was terrible. All it would do was turn us into school shooters. That's how we were kind of raised to think of video games. There was no way we would consider it as a space for art, for poetry, even for storytelling, and that's what's happening there. You know what I mean? So I think realizing like, okay, sitting with a book is not going to quite vibe with where I am today, and then finding like different ways to access that wonder anyway, has been sustaining.
Man, okay, now I'm inspired. That was amazing. I really am. I'm like, damn, I got to do that. I got to do everything Saeed just said. I I'm thinking, okay, I'm just gonna think real practically. Like, I think like I'm kind of a serious person in some ways. Like when I want to do something or when I'm after something, I get very zoned in. And my partner is extraordinarily goofy and clowns me often and like really makes fun of me, like actually like makes fun of me to the point where I have to like, I'm like stunned at how much she's making fun of me. And I think I come from like a family and a culture that is a little bit more, takes offense to being made fun of. And so it's been really fun for the last quarantine that we've been together, to just be really relentlessly made fun of, because it makes me feel like I'm breaking out of my kind of like serious, maybe like meditator or whatever life project I've got going on. So I would say getting made fun of, major joy. And then another one is we've been watching Criterion Collection and just like going ham on some movies because we're really like plugged into what the culture is watching. We'll watch it. But then there are these movies, it's like, who is watching this? And the ones that we've been watching are just like all Agnes Varda's movies. In particular, one, it's like Agnes and Jane B, and it's a double portraiture of Agnes making it of her friend who's an actor, Jane, and then Jane is not releasing Agnes from the director role and kind of like turning the camera on her. And so we've been talking a lot about portraiture. I mean, this, it's also just like us being dumb in our underwear eating, but it's also talking about portraiture and like what does it mean to, like, can you ever make a portrait of someone without obviously like infusing you into it? And I love that Agnes Varda like just like totally reversed it and allows herself to be a subject. So Criterion Collection, getting made fun of. And I will say this is a little controversial, but kind of giving up a little bit, which doesn't mean not being active in the world or doing things that I'm passionate about or going after things that but like, I'm not working out. Like, I don't care. And like, my body is exactly my body and I don't effing care. And my cat does all the things that he wants to do. I cannot train him. I don't care. Like, there's this part of giving up that feels, it's like surrendering to what's going to happen anyway and kind of where you're at. And I feel like quarantine, there's been so much talk in this moment of just how hard it is and the things we should do to get out of that. And I'm kind of like, sometimes you just got to sit on the couch and watch Agnes Varda and chill and play your video game. So I'll drop the mic on that. Yeah.
I love it. Thank you all so much. This has been a fantastic exchange. And our audience has stayed with us. We have a very strong audience through this whole thing. So thank you to you all as well. And artists for making it worth their stay to stick around. I'll note we're putting the video link in the chat, and this is so that you can know in about a week, this will be available for viewing outside of this room here. And I will note that we have captured the audience list and we'll be reaching out to 20 of you tomorrow with the good news that you will soon have a free book arriving in your mailbox, and you'll have the opportunity to tell us where to send it and which title you would like. To conclude our evening, I want to thank you all again, Ross, Saeed, Shira, for sharing your work so generously. Thank you, Nicole, for guiding us through such a rich evening. And my goodness, your introductions were amazing. And Sarah, Chris, Aaliyah, Janae, thank you for representing our Kenyan community and our co-sponsors so well. And thank you, audience, for choosing this as your space for the past couple of hours. We appreciate you and wish you rest and health. Good night, everyone.